Thank you for joining us today. We are really excited to talk about this topic. We've got a couple of wonderful people on the call today, so I'll introduce everybody here in just a second. I do want to give everybody a few moments to join, so we will give everybody just a few seconds to sign on. So this is how to stick out in a Tableau, or how to stick out in the crowd, Tableau Developer Edition. So if you are in the data fam, if you're thinking about looking for a Tableau job, this is the space for you. Without further ado, Jeff, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, it says that I just looked, there's a notification up there. It says they're having trouble posting to LinkedIn. It's maybe a problem with LinkedIn. Just FYI.
Okay, looks clear on my side.
Okay, all right, cool. Just want to make sure that we were streaming. So, hello everybody, I'm Jeff Huckabee, CEO and co-founder of Versalytics, and happy to be here today and just share some best practices, some things that we've seen, and add some insight. I used to run analytics on some pretty large enterprise teams, and just want to share some things that made people stick out to us out of seas of sometimes up to thousands of applicants.
And I'm Bridget Cogley. I'm the Chief Visualization Officer of Versalytics. I'm also a Tableau Hall of Fame visionary, and I am one of the talent finders at Versalytics. And so I, like Jeff, have historically ran teams before. I've mentored and advised a lot of people through the job creation process. And way back in the distant history, I used to do resumes as a side gig. So this is definitely a topic near and dear to my heart, just due to kind of my experiences with this. Our guest of honor today, I'm really excited to very briefly introduce and then let her tell you a little bit more about herself, Nicole Mark. If I had a live audience, we'd have applause. But.
Yes, of course. Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole. I'm a data visualization engineer at cart.com in my 40 hours a week life. I'm also a Tableau social ambassador and the founder of the Women in Data Viz Slack community, which is one of my favorite things I'm doing right now. It's just wonderful to connect and collaborate with so many people that use all the data viz tools. It's a fantastic community. Join if you like. We'll drop the Slack link in for you. I also co-lead two Tableau user groups, the Tampa Bay Tableau user group and the healthcare Tableau user group.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today, Nicole. It'll be great to have your expertise. So here at Versalytics, we were founded just over a year ago to help people be successful with analytics. And we actually do that through three different ways. Through analytics consulting, and that's basically complete stack up and down, let's say the analytics stack from data viz down to database, advanced analytics, data engineering, and basically everything in between. But we also have a recruiting company. And so one common theme for a lot of different companies around the world when they're looking for talent, sometimes they don't exactly know what to look for, how to look for it, how to vet that talent. So we take some of that guesswork out of that whole process for the companies that we work with. And last but not least, we'll have some announcements coming out really soon. But we're developing a suite of what we call analytics solutions as a service that allow you to quickly deploy some leading edge capabilities in seconds and not 6 to 9 months. So we're really excited about what we're building there.
And so a part of today, what we're looking at, and just a real quick look at this, is how employers see these roles. So when we talk about talent acquisition and recruiting, a lot of times employers are looking at kind of their constellation of everybody that they've got in their purview, whether it's, I'm working with a small analytics team, whether it's a very large analytics deployment, but they're constantly looking at the talent mix and skills that are available. And so I've got a sample kind of talent matrix here. I really love these. These are an extraordinarily powerful tool, and they can be customized. So you can look at your team and say, maybe project management's a part of it. Maybe we've got kind of a dedicated space for user experience and we kind of take that out. Maybe there's testing components. So this is a really nice scalable model where you take the values and the key parts of the role and spread it out and then identify who has what skills. The other part when people start looking at roles is they're working within a very specific budget for salary. We've all kind of ran into it, on the interviewing side where it's trying to figure out, oh, hey, what are the salary requirements and everything. And then for the company itself, generally what they're doing is they're saying, okay, we feel a crunch, we know we need a person, and they're often trying to figure out who can they get within the balance of what they've got to work with from a salary standpoint. And the flexibility on that may vary widely. I know several orgs are sometimes very locked in. They've got maybe a $10,000 spread, and they can't really spread that much further. Other companies will sometimes have that variation where they can say, okay, you know what, I can either upsize this role or downsize this role or pivot. And so you'll see that kind of flexibility play out as you interview. The other part of this is you'll run into cultural expectations. And this may be either from leadership, but this may also come from people who've either held the role before or somebody within the team that's just absolutely shining and highlighting maybe where cultural adds are a key component. A lot of times we talk about culture fit, but there's also the idea of culturally adding and enriching your culture as well.
Yeah, so a couple things just wanted to make people aware of from a resume perspective, first and foremost. A lot of times, particularly with the automation that you see through the various ATS systems, and these are the systems that take an insane amount of resumes, and when you submit this to your company X, what happens is they're looking at your resume for very literal matches, and there's nothing like synonyms. So let's just say if the role was a Tableau developer role and you put your job title as a Tableau data visualization expert, you actually wouldn't get a match. And so what happens is if there's not enough matches for the role that you get, and usually that threshold is 80%, if then the hiring manager, the HR manager, they have no idea that you even exist. So it's really important that one of the first things that you do is, and you should have, let's say, a base resume. But if you have a role, let's say that you're submitting it to, let's just throw the name out there. Let's just say it's Salesforce. You want to have a resume that is purpose fit to that role. And so you want to make sure that the terms match exactly with what's in the job description. So starting at the very beginning, you want to make sure you get above that 80% rate. And a lot of times people don't realize that, business intelligence isn't the same as data visualization. And you have to have exact, even the plural of data visualization, right? It has to be exactly match. So once you do that, now all of a sudden you get above that 80% match. And I've also seen people do things like creative graphics, and you want to do enough to maybe not just be a plain, boring, just dump of information on your resume. And you also want to have the critical things at the very top of that. Sometimes, if you think about it, if you were reviewing resumes of hundreds of people or even thousands of people, sometimes the hiring managers, for better or worse, a lot of times they don't make it past maybe a fourth of the way down the page. So you really want to have that information at the top, be able to see that very, very quickly and put your key wins there. If you have a key win that's at the bottom of the resume or on page 2, a lot of times people won't even see it.
The other part to this is when I'm doing resumes, I will often have people either send me job descriptions or we'll take the job description and take a lot of those verbs and nouns. That's going to be your keys. Grab those verbs, nouns, and adjectives and make sure that when you're conveying your skills to that employer, that you're matching their language. And that gets through the ATS, that gets through the ambiguity. The other part that when I'm training people on resumes is kind of, I did X to Y effect, is you want those powerful statements wherever you can incorporate numbers or just measurements of the effect that you had, the much farther you'll go within kind of finding that job. The other key part, and Jeff and I have done this several times now where, we've hired for certain roles, we've recruited for certain roles. And I would say the number one way to stand out, and I know Nicole is going to address this as well, is to have an easy to find portfolio. The more you can prove who you are, what you do, and your value set and your skill set, the easier it is to pass you forward. This portfolio is so important. I gave it its own section. And the reason is you want to have, 2 to 3 quality pieces go a long way. I'm not necessarily looking for, when I'm looking at somebody, I'm not looking for a long list of, I've made 100 visualizations. That's great. When I look through somebody's portfolio, I start at the bottom and I look to see, did you grow? Did you mature? Did you challenge yourself? And, have you been, potentially brave enough to keep out what you would consider your failings, especially as you mature? It's very intimidating sometimes to keep those old visualizations out there. You're like, oh, they're ugly, they're terrible, they don't represent who I am. But they really showcase that story of here's where I started, here's where I am today. And so play to your strengths.
I looked at mine the other day and I almost took one out, but I was like,
don't do it. Leave it there.
I'm going to redo it, but I'm going to leave the original one.
Yeah.
And it has a conversation with people. I have a lot of experiments. I don't have a ton of time. And so, I do a lot of experiments where I'll take a visualization and play with variations on a theme. And even that is valid. Yeah. And so the final piece of word of advice with the portfolio is just play to your strengths. I mean, my strength is I love to experiment. I love to play. Nicole, I know later in the presentation, you've got a lot of advice in this area. So I can't wait to turn it over to you here in a few moments. Interviewing is really key. And Jeff, I want to pull you back in because, in doing this process, you in particular had some kind of experiences that really surprised me. The one thing I'll say with interviewing is it's a mutual interview. A lot of times, particularly certain demographics, will go into an interview and we're nervous and we kind of make it this power struggle of, oh, I want them to want me, forgetting that we want to make sure that this is a great cultural fit for us as well. And so that's the key. A lot of times when I'm mentoring people or talking to people, it is a mutual interview. Write down your value sets and make sure that what you need, you're able to get from the company. And that includes researching. Jeff, I want to turn it over to you at this point.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? When you first start interviewing, when you're out of college, you're answering questions and you're just thinking, okay, am I answering questions the right way? And then as you kind of progress in your career, it's really important that the interview process is a two-way street. And so it's really important before you go interview to learn as much about the company as possible. And it's actually a lot easier to do that today with LinkedIn and connections. Try to find out a little bit from people that work there internally, and I think some of my favorite questions from an analytics perspective is find out, do they have a analytics strategy? If they have a strategy, then usually that means they have budget. If they have a team, then it means that it's actually strategic as well. But one of the worst things that you can happen throughout the course of an interview, in my opinion, is when they ask you for questions, if you're just like, no, I think I'm okay. And sometimes, even if you had 5 questions and they answered all of them, make sure you ask a couple questions, because that actually is a pretty big signal to the interviewer that you've really thought about this. And just thinking about the role in the company and doing some research is going to set you apart from the other people that are interviewing. Not everybody does that, but we highly recommend that you do that. And then also there's some small kind of things to help you differentiate a little bit. And the first thing is show up on time. And we're all busy. Life happens, this webinar got reposted because life happened, and that's okay. And it happens with interviews as well, but just make sure you communicate that. We had somebody that was scheduled for an interview a couple weeks ago. They no-showed. And then they emailed about an hour later and said, hey, sorry, I had something pop up. That's not acceptable in this day and age, particularly if you are part of a group of hundreds of other people. A lot of times that just means that you down selected yourself, right? And so just email, be proactive. Hey, something came up. I've got an important meeting I can't get out of now. People understand that. And then last and not least, I think a lot of times whenever you're interviewing, I think you should always send a follow-up email. And sometimes it's hard. You don't have time. You don't have capacity to do it. Just do it. Send just a couple, even if it's a couple sentences. Hey, thank you for your time. I really enjoyed this process. And I would say do that even if you have no intent of accepting an offer during the interview. One thing that I tell a lot of people that I interface with in the analytics space, the whole analytics world is so small, it's unbelievable. And the people that you meet at company A may be the people that you meet and you interface with at company B. And so just be nice, be professional, follow up, thank them for your time. And it's incredible how these little things like that, communication and, and follow-up emails leap you ahead of other people, just from a personal marketing perspective.
So yeah, everything that Jeff and Bridget just said, 100% yes. You probably saw me nodding my head and trying to keep my mouth closed and not interrupt them. But really, those little things, even if I have no interest in the job, 100%, send the follow-up email. You never know. I have run into people from healthcare, my old healthcare background, who are now like pharmacy informaticists, which is pharmacy data person, essentially. So 100% all of that. So you want to be a Tableau database designer, developer, whatever the role is called at the organization that you may go work for. It is a great job. I love it so much. I've had maybe 10 different roles, titles in my career. It's the best job. It's impactful. It's rewarding. You're already interested, so I don't need to sell you on that. So if you're getting started in data visualization or in your whole career, and this is your goal, I would say, and you're focused on Tableau probably because you're in a webinar that has Tableau in the title, create a Tableau public profile. Immediately, like today. It takes 5 minutes to create the profile. Put a decent headshot. If you have no vizzes created yet, fine, but just have it and then make a plan to get some on there. And like Bridget said, quality over quantity. You don't need to do 100 vizzes. Do a couple of really thoughtful ones. Do your best at the time that you're doing them. Use the resources that are available to you. If you're on Twitter, use the hashtag DataFam. Ask a question. You are going to be amazed at the number of helpful responses you will get back. That was one of my first impressions of the Tableau community, was like, oh my gosh, all of these people are willing to help me. What's in it for them? And honestly, it's just a great community. And I mean, of course, there are side benefits, but like they're really in it to help. The visualizations in your profile show your range. If you have some previous career and you're transitioning into data visualization, use that. I have a lot of healthcare related visualizations on my profile because that's what I know really well. And when COVID-19 happened, I have a lot of background in pharmacy. So I found it to be, not only was I interested in the variants and the trends and whatnot, but it was a good subject for me to viz.
One of the other things I'll chime in is particularly with things like Workout Wednesday, or even when you take somebody else's viz as inspiration, I'm looking at those citations. And so one of the things, I'm trying to see is, do you, steal a nod effectively? Do you, if you're participating in Workout Wednesday, what are you learning from this? And so feel free to put those in some of the comments in the titling. And then too, if you're mirroring somebody's style or you're using a visualization to kind of bootstrap off of, use kind of that description field to explain what you did or what you did differently and why, but also make sure you're giving appropriate credit, because that is something I look at. Anytime I read a book, I'm looking at who they cite, because that gives me kind of that constellation of influence.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And there's a specific field for a link in Tableau Public. And if I used a tutorial from, say, like Kevin Flurlidge or someone, I always put that in there. Because effectively they taught me how to do that part of it.
And I will, in interviews, sometimes ask, where do you get your information or where do you learn from? Because again, I'm really trying to understand that constellation of influence.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that question right there is, I know that's And I used to hire for large scale analytics teams, and now obviously we're hiring for our company and also other companies. But I would always ask that one question: how do you learn? Because a lot of times the answer can tell you about people that are driven. Are they, and how they learn, to make sure that I say, if I was the hiring manager, I can actually support the way that they want to learn. Not everybody learns the same way. But that question also answers a lot of questions for the interviewer and if you don't have a really good answer to that and your resume looks kind of static, then it means you're kind of just not learning, not progressing. So just, yeah, that's a very important question to have a good answer to, I guess you could say.
Yes, I think that's an excellent call out. I hadn't thought to include that. That's really good, really good. I essentially already said this. This is just a business data visualization that's in my Tableau public portfolio. I honestly don't love doing business vises for fun because I do a lot of them at work, but I can't publish the ones I do at work that I'm really proud of because they're, they're the property of my company that I work for. So do at least some. This is based on a real one that I did at my prior company. I did essentially the same viz using fake data.
And that fake data you got from real world fake data. And I like that initiative because there's a lot of different business domains that they hit on where you can say, okay, I've got this use case. I'd love to, show it without necessarily showing it the wrong way. And it doesn't always have the best business patterns, but you can go in and kind of say, here's the technique, and this is what I want to show.
And the data sets specifically from real world fake data, it's a mouthful, that Mark Bradburn leads, they're very realistic. I do not like working with fake data, but I don't mind those because they're really close to being actual data. Community challenges. This one was a back to Viz Basics data set. The challenge was to build a scatter plot. The data that they provided was about college basketball, which is something I feel very passionately about because I lived in North Carolina for 11 years and it's a big deal there, like football is in the South. In the
Go Balls.
Go Heels. I made just a basic scatter plot here, put some KPIs at the top, but I called out the two coaches of the North Carolina teams that have a big rivalry, Duke and UNC, and I compared their stats. And, you could make the case that either one of them is the better coach from this viz. So I leave that to the viewer to decide. Obviously, it's Roy Williams, but if you're wrong, that's okay. You don't have to be right about everything. I also love diversity in data and Project Health is for obvious reasons, but diversity in data, I learn something new every time I participate because those data sets are so great. I can't say enough good things about that particular initiative. I try to do it every single time.
So I think maybe, also to a unwritten aspect of having a diverse set of examples is you never know what type of connection you may make with the interviewer as well. And like Nicole, if you showed that to me, I would have taken you off during your interview, a tangent of basketball, but you never know those connections, right? And you never know what that interviewer, what they like, what they dislike.
True.
And so I think that's also a really good way to kind of make a human connection during the interview process.
It's true.
Actually, and I wouldn't hesitate to bring up these examples to showcase a particular point either.
100%.
There's been times in interviews where it's like, I have something for this very point. Let me show you instead of just telling you.
Absolutely. I really quickly, just a real world story, what Jeff just said. I was interviewing for a job at a pharmaceutical company. The hiring manager saw a Sports Viz Sunday that I did that I don't think is anywhere near my best work. Like, it's okay, in my opinion, but I haven't taken it off my profile because that's why he contacted me. He said, I saw this viz about women's lacrosse. It's so interesting. I guess he had never seen a bump chart before. And he asked me to tell him about a bump chart. And that's how I ended up in that interview. It was, so yeah, what Jeff said, 100%. Viz, the things that you care about, your passion comes through completely. I have two vizzes of the day. the topics were both super important to me. Like this one right here, the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index, is about how companies treat their LGBTQ employees, what practices and policies they have around that. And the Human Rights Campaign measures that a variety of ways. In the viz, I talk about the measurements that they use. But that's so important to me that I spent a lot of time on this viz, and I took great care with it. And I didn't use Figma. I didn't use Illustrator, which are a lot of times you think you need to be more designy. No, if you care about the topic, like this is 100% Tableau except for their logo.
And as a recruiter, I mean, when I look at this visualization, I can start, beginning the conversations around ethics. I can begin the conversations around scaffolding and how you present information to other people. I can see that we've got crafted narrative. And so we've also got branding. And so these are all aspects that, based on public work, I can very easily talk to Nicole about.
Yeah, absolutely. And then resumes. Oh my gosh. So I was on the hiring team at my company before Cart for an analytics developer position, which is back to Jeff's point, what we called a data visualization developer there. And we changed the name a few times too, just for fun. And we got over 1,000 applications for this position. And they went through that screening process that Jeff was talking about. We had a system like that screened out a lot of people, but I still had 1,000 of them in front of me. And one of the things that struck me is they're applying for a job that's visual. And in our job description, we were asking about Tableau and specifically said, please include your Tableau public profile link if you have one, whatever. And I'm seeing all these black and white pages, one after the other. And I'm just like glazing over, not because I don't care, but there's so many. But there were a couple that had even just a little color. I mean, you have to go crazy like I did with my whole branding logo situation there. And also, I'll give you a caveat about that resume in a second. But offer something visual, even if it's a small thing, that will make your resume not black and white, not the standard format that everyone is using. As you can see on the other side, I also have one of those resumes, but I still have a little orange in there just to say, just so it pops out a little bit. And I have a few things highlighted in orange.
Yeah. So if I got your resume as part of a stack of 100, and usually they're aggregated, let's say, into a stack of PDFs, let's say.
Yeah.
So literally people will just scroll, and I used to take out my Surface device because I could use my finger. And if I came and I did some very visual resumes, and what would happen is I would see it and you would capture my attention. So think about that as you submit your resume, you're really marketing yourself. And there's actually, and if this, kind of this visual representation, or even getting back to the ATS comments about, the things or the exact terms, there's actually services, and we can send this out later, or somebody that I used before in the past, that will actually, they can help you, and they can actually upload your resume into this software. And then you can give them the job description, and they'll give you a detailed breakdown of where your score is going to be. So you'll know before you even submit it that, hey, I'm in the 95% range of all the terms. So just wanted to add that, and we'll follow up with an email of some of those links. I just now thought about that, but yeah.
I didn't know that existed. I think that's great. So definitely people utilize that resource. And you may need to have numerous resumes. Like I have a folder of, I was looking yesterday at which ones would be current, 8 to 10 resumes. And they're not hugely different, but like Jeff was saying, they have different job titles. Like one says business intelligence analyst, one says data analyst. The most frequent one I use says both data analyst and data visualization developer, because that really is what I think of myself as. But you might need to change the title on your resume if it says analytics developer, for instance, for the reasons that Jeff already said.
So my biggest resume hack is I actually keep a separate document of all of my qualification lines, and I bucket them by skills. That is my number one resume hack. And then what I do is I keep basically a bone or a skeleton layout. And for every single job, I customize that resume. And then I make sure to make a folder and then save the resume with my name and the file name and the job title in it. And that also helps your recruiters because depending on how they're getting the information, if they're getting in an email and it says resume, you are almost guaranteed to get lost in a pile just based on file naming. And so that is something else to consider, is that even the file name itself matters.
Yep.
And
I
then
almost thought that was obvious. Mine's like Nicole Mark _ data analyst and a date. The dates are for me to know which one is current. But that's excellent advice as well. It might not be obvious to change the file name.
And then this is another example that you found.
Yeah. This is Sarah Moore's data visualization engineer resume. I love this. When I saw this, I was like, if I had a company, I would hire her in a second. I mean, I also know her work is very good because I can click on one of those links and go look at it. But if I were looking through resumes, and the title had anything to do with visualization. So I would not submit this resume for data analyst or senior data analyst. I would use my other more text-based resume. But if this was my resume and the word visualization was in the title, I would use this. And as a person trying to hire, I would look at this and really, really be curious about this person.
And it really goes back to, you're looking for a visual job. You show your qualifications as much as you tell them.
Right. Totally. Social media is one of my favorite things to do. I'm a Tableau social ambassador. I'm a Gemini. If you like astrology, we're social butterflies. Or that's my sun sign anyway. I'm not even going to go down that path right now. But on your social media, you're the product. So whatever you put on there, and I don't censor myself, but I just have in the back of my mind, I'm willing to defend what I said. I use colorful language sometimes in relation to certain topics, but there are things I feel very strongly about. And if a company disagreed with me, I probably don't want to work for them anyway, because their values don't align with mine. But depending where you are in your career too, that it might be more important earlier in your career than like if I have a ton of experience, then, they might be willing to overlook the fact that I have some very strong feelings about Governor Ron DeSantis here in Florida, that I might have called him a few little names about.
And two, this is a great cultural tripwire for you when you're looking at jobs, because you're probably not going to shine at a place where you are not in at least some level of value alignment. And so that's the thing is, when I'm a recruiter and I'm looking at people, what presence do you put out there? Are you a good cultural fit for this organization? Because particularly in our role as kind of a talent acquisition, we want both parties to be happy. It doesn't work when only one party is happy because, at some point the relation gets severed one way or the other. And we're really looking for, how do we make the best fit possible for both parties involved?
That is a great point.
Yeah, this is a conversation I just had with my wife and I, with our 18-year-old son and 21-year-old son, about on Twitter what they like. Yes, that meme was funny, but at some point, could a future employer who, yes, they do have automated systems that pull in information.
They do.
And there are some employers, and I personally think this is crazy, will ask for your login information. Because if they have your login information, they can actually pull in more information. To me, I think that's overstepping. That's another webinar for another day. But some people ask for that. And so you got to be really, really careful out there. And just, I've seen more and more, particularly on LinkedIn, really, really strong opinions on different topics around the world. I think it's great to have an opinion. It's just, maybe sometimes that stuff is better for Facebook versus LinkedIn. Me personally, I use LinkedIn for professional work. And, but if you do, just know that sometimes those opinions, one way or the other, you may turn off an employer, and that may be perfectly fine. you may not want to work for that employer. But it does matter. And I think all those different elements of your social profile, just be very cognizant that it could be used for or also against you.
And I would also say that this goes for employers as well. I know many times I've gone and looked at a company. I've also gone and looked at, okay, I'm interviewing with this person. What are they saying on LinkedIn? This person may be my prospective manager. What are they saying? And, am I going to be able to, be in agreement? So, know that too does go both ways as well.
I think that's a great point. There are like Publix got a 0 on that HRC corporate equality index viz that was a couple slides ago. I don't want to work for somebody who got a 0 on that, because that's too important to me personally. Like I feel too stressed. I mean, sorry, Publix, no visits for you. But yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. That's how you can find out if, it will be if it's worth your time, if it's a role that you would like.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I want to add one more thing for employers. If you're listening to this, I get to talk to a lot of college students in analytics, and it's amazing to me how many of them, if they're applying for a role, they'll do a Google search, and if they see nothing about analytics, no presentations, no sort of public kind of declaration or involvement in the community, they will deselect you automatically. And that's becoming more and more of a concern for new people that are entering into the analytics workforce. They want to see that you're out, you're talking, you're sharing what you're doing, along with other social causes. But I know sometimes companies don't like to go out and present because they think it's their secret sauce. And on the other side of the spectrum, there's companies that are hiring some of the best analytics talent today, and they host hackathons at major analytics conferences for the sole purpose of identifying really good talent to bring into their organization. So if you're on the spectrum that, on the far end of the spectrum where you don't want any information to get out publicly because you think it's your secret sauce, you're already being deselected by a lot of different people and really good talent because they see nothing that you're doing publicly. So there's a balance there. You don't have to give away all of your information and your trade secrets, but you can put enough out there. And from what I've seen before in my past, you actually can give a roadmap and show people exactly how to deliver A, B, and C. And that doesn't mean other organizations can go out and execute that. So, all right. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that was a great segue into this slide, Jeff. The third point is get involved in professional associations or communities. Companies have a level of community involvement. It's important that you have a level of community involvement. It shows your dedication to and enthusiasm for data visualization. And it doesn't have to be a particular one necessarily. I mean, if you're working with Tableau as your tool, I would highly recommend that you get involved in the data fam stuff, because that's going to be, your employers are very aware of, if they know anything about Tableau, even a little, they're aware of where the people are and what the hashtags are that they would use to find you. And then Women in Data Viz, the Slack community that I run, you would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised. There are many networking and connections that you can make there. My former company before Cart, a third of the company was laid off last spring. One of them started a Slack. I'm still on that Slack, and they invited a lot of us that used to work there that weren't laid off. And all the jobs and connections and I see happen there. This person knows this person is going to help this person. And there's a whole channel for celebrations. And you see, like, I want to thank this person for making this connection. And sometimes it's like 3 or 4 degrees of connections. So don't underestimate the importance of being involved. And there's Women in Analytics, they have a community. They have webinars pretty frequently. They host a conference in Ohio once a year. There are a whole bunch of them. Let's see. Save the descriptions of roles that you would like to have. So don't limit yourself because you don't think you're there yet. I saw this amazing quote this morning from Amy Poehler that I'm going to find. I don't know why I did not have this up immediately, but I found it pretty fast. She said, her quote was, "Great people do things before they're ready." Like many people I've talked to in Women in Data Viz and just in the data fam in general, have been like, "Oh, I hope to do that one day. I hope to do this one day." Well, don't limit yourself now. Like, write your own job description of your dream role. Like, write it whether you're qualified for it or not, in your opinion, at this moment.
If I had waited for my role, I'd still be waiting.
Me too. 100%. Seriously, I would still be data analyst 1 at corporate company and, bored to tears. But instead, like, I saved job descriptions. Part of the reason I save job descriptions is to know what skills I need to develop. And those change over time. Like, suddenly I've started seeing some roles with Julia, the programming language, and D3 is becoming more and more popular among data visualization jobs. And those are non-Tableau ones. They're just things that popped into my mind. So don't think you need to go learn Julia and D3 or anything right now. But just so you have an idea of what you need to supplement your skills in Tableau, like Python is frequent. SQL is a must. I hate SQL. I will say it publicly. I prefer to do my transformations and stuff in Python, but I have to know SQL or I'm not going to pass all this. The 9 out of 10 of these jobs have a SQL assessment. Let's see what else here. I think I got. Oh, develop your soft, or Bridget told me this term the other day, durable skills. I prefer
Rodriguez.
like that term a lot better than, because soft skills is almost like, oh, develop your women's skills. Like, and that makes me mad as a feminist. So, but there are things like writing, any kind of communication. I mean, obviously data visualization is a communication skill in itself. But giving presentations, this is one I've been working on for the last couple of years. That's one of the reasons I say yes to things like this, other than the fact that I like Bridget and Jeff, is that I know that is a skill that I'm looking to become more proficient in. And 1 year ago, I gave the first real big presentation that I've given to the diversity, equity, and inclusion employee resource group at my previous company. I was sweating. I had an anxiety attack. It wasn't that great, in my opinion, but I got through it. And it was about ADHD. And a number of people contacted me and were like, "Oh, I didn't know you could get that as an adult or have a diagnosis as an adult." So even though it might not have been my brightest moment, it was the first one that I did that I knew made an impact and was a full hour. So say yes to some of those opportunities, even if you really don't want to. And not, if you don't have the capacity, of course, don't say yes. But if you feel anxious, push through it. And I say that as a person with CPTSD, like, I have anxiety, but get through it. I talked to my therapist about that other part. Make a list of your requirements for the job and your nice to haves and your deal breakers, just like you see them make a list. Like, if it says Power BI, I don't know Power BI, and I'm not going to learn another BI tool. So that job doesn't align with my list. One of my deal breakers is it has to be remote. I've found that I'm much more productive remote. I love being with my dogs all day. I like making my lunch in the kitchen instead of it sitting in a boring and depressing break room and eating 3-day-old birthday cake. Interviews, women especially, don't be modest now. You can be modest at other times, but not in the interview. This is the time where you want to tell the story of your best, proudest moments, the things that you did that you remember made you feel like you really contributed to a project or a team, especially if it's a team thing. I think that's especially important to organizations. A WellCare executive, when I was working as a data quality analyst here in Tampa at WellCare, was giving just a kind of a like fireside chat sort of thing. It was informal to some employees. I just happened to sit in on it at lunchtime. And he gave this one nugget of advice from this 30-minute talk that I remember. Every Friday, write down one win that you had at work, because it's hard, especially if you have short-term memory things. If you have ADHD or something like that, you're not going to be able to easily remember those. And probably no one easily remembers these things, right?
I used to do mine on sticky notes, and then I would also keep a Trello board where I would literally just make them and move them, and then eventually float those into my qualification lines.
Yeah, and find a system that works.
And we'd update the spreadsheet. I had a reminder once a month to go in and do it, because if not, you get at the end of the year. And for some people that were doing a lot of like transformation and changing things quickly, you get a year in, 6 months, 2 months in, and you're like, oh, I forgot we did all that. Mm-hmm. And so, and I will say, be humble smart. It's like you have to have confidence and you've done the things that you've done. And then I would also say tie some of those back to either efficiency or business value. Yeah. That's something that has, I think, been instrumental in my personal career, going back over a couple decades and this was probably the accountant in me. But now you're starting to see a lot of people do this, right? Where, hey, we did this, we created this, we solved this business problem. Here's what revenue was. And then a couple months later, here's what revenue was, or the cost that we saved. And if you can start quantifying those and putting those in your resume, all of a sudden, those resumes, particularly people that are hiring people, they're like, oh, not only are they really good at what they do from a data visualization perspective, but they understand the business context. They're making things where we can go and take action. They understand the business. And so those types of connections, I think in your resume and having those types of elements in there are game changing for people.
Yeah. And Jeff, understanding business context to me is a data analyst skill anyway.
Yep.
So if you put numbers in your resume, of course you should. You're a data analyst. You did this % of this. Awesome. Like, you should definitely do that. Yep. But don't lie. Like, I'm thinking about, like, I'm telling people to be not to be too modest, but also like be authentic, tell the truth. You can be confident and also play to your strengths, and also say, oh, that's an area I haven't had a lot of experience in. You don't have to check off every single box on the job description. I never have. I don't think I've ever checked them, every single one.
Yeah. And I think that script that you have about, I don't have experience in it yet is key, or I'm willing to learn, or I'm excited to learn.
Or like, I haven't had an opportunity to learn that yet.
Yeah.
Like,
and sometimes interviewers,
that it's positive and not negative.
I'm sorry, Nicole. Sometimes interviewers will ask questions way outside the bounds just to see how do you respond.
Right.
And you say, oh, yeah, I've done that too. Or no, I haven't done that. And that'd be an area I'd love to. Do I have an opportunity at your organization to learn that at some point? Or is that an important skill set you guys are looking for? Because and you can see if you're the interviewer, you're reading body language and everything. And if I ask Bridget a question, and I know that she's hasn't done that, you can tell pretty quickly. And so,
it doesn't even require words. The body language tells you.
Absolutely.
Role play the interview. I can't tell you how helpful this has been for me, especially when I was at a transition point in my career where I knew the next job was really important. Like the first, sort of senior data analyst role, I was like, okay, I've got to get this one right. And I role played it.
One of my hacks with this is I used to intentionally include diversion. So I would either have people throw paper balls or other really distracting things, because if you can make it through that, you can make it through anything. And I learned that from my interpreting program.
Yeah. And it's real life. Things like that are going to happen. The Zoom meeting is going to freeze and you're going to feel anxious about it. But we all have had Zoom freeze. So the interviewer understands that technical glitches happen, respond to them with grace and a sense of humor. Just go with the flow about it. Just like, of course, Zoom would freeze up when I'm trying to get a job. I mean, yeah, don't take it too seriously when something like that happens. So you didn't get the job. It's okay. Like, and it's not necessarily, I hear people too often take it as a rejection of them personally, and their skills aren't good enough or whatever. There are so many things that go into hiring that are beyond your control, that the like higher up in companies like I've gotten have become more obvious, like hiring freezes. No one's going to tell you there's a hiring freeze. Companies don't want to admit that because it means they're not feeling too successful right now. So they're not going to say, sorry, we didn't give you the job because we had a hiring freeze. Also, shifts in hiring priorities, like whole reorganizations. I've worked for 3 startups in a row. Reorganizations happen, like it seems like every couple of months. That's probably not exactly the timing, but they happen all the time. And sometimes, so my last round of when I was looking for the job that when ultimately ended up being CART, I had an interview where I could just tell the interviewer did not like me. And I think it was because I'm a woman and I was opinionated, and he was an older dude who was just like, I'm the gatekeeper to data analytics. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not what it, but we definitely didn't click.
I can't believe somebody didn't like you, Nicole.
I can't.
What a terrible hiring manager. I will go on record on that right now.
I'll tell you later who it was. No, but you just aren't going to click with every single person. And honestly, later on, I realized that company wouldn't have been a great fit for me anyway. I didn't know as much about it as I learned later. Some of my former colleagues went to work there, and I learned some more later. So it was a blessing in disguise. I know that's sort of a trope, but it's just not always about you. Don't take it personally. Just move on and ask for feedback. Like, it seems like maybe you're putting the person out, but every time I've asked for feedback, I've gotten a response. Like when I've asked, is there something that I could take from this experience to do better in my next interview? They love to share. Everyone likes to talk about themselves. They want to share their knowledge. They want to tell you what they know. So they're going to respond.
And I will put one caveat on this of ask once, get the response.
Only
but you want to limit how many times you press.
Don't keep asking follow-up questions.
But definitely get that feedback, because a lot of times, especially as recruiters, we're happy to share, these things would be helpful and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we had a recent company that we recruited for, and they actually submitted an offer to somebody else. And the second person on that list that they didn't offer the job to, they really loved the way that this person responded after being told not to get the job. And they really liked the person a lot. They just didn't have the number of years of experience, the maturity that they kind of had, but they loved the answers. They loved the interview, and they're already lining up to potentially offer this person a job in February when they know that additional roles are going to open up. And so this is why, like, some of these small things like this, they're actually really big things. And asking the question of, hey, I'd love to get the feedback, where you're not just angry and you just don't want to interface with them because you didn't get the job, but that tells, the companies that you really care and you value their feedback. And if they're looking to add more people like that into the organization, it may not be the job you get today, but it may be the job you get a couple months from now. And so that's, really important to kind of think about as you go. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes down to, say there are 5 people whose experience is approximately equivalent, those little things are going to be the person that gets hired is the one who was attentive to those details. My final slide here, I think it's my final slide, is some advice that from the Women in Data Viz community members. I asked them, I said, I'm going to do a presentation. What advice do you have for people that are looking to become data visualization developers? And here's what they said. Don't wait for the conditions to be perfect to go after your dream gig. You're never going to learn anything about data visualization, analytics, or even just Tableau, everything about it. And no one expects you to, except maybe you. I'm like that. Lean into the parts you like. You don't have to code in 7 languages to be successful at this. The understanding of people and their needs and storytelling aspects are just as valuable, and they're harder to find. 100%. They are harder skills to find. Constantly learn. This one resonates with me a lot. Even if it isn't something you're going to apply to your day-to-day per se, you'll be surprised by the people you learn from the most. Be open to the different types of relationships you form over the years. I still am in contact with pharmacists who taught me things, and they have nothing to do with data visualization, but there are some skills that they have that have helped me a lot. And finally, you likely won't have anyone else in your department. This is from someone who's not on, whose company, and this is common, doesn't have a big data team, and the company isn't, every company says they're data driven. There's only a few that are. I happen to work for a company that is actually data driven because one of the founders is a data scientist. I mean, but be leery of the phrase data driven, just FYI. You might not have anybody else in your apartment who understands and loves data viz to the extent that you do. So find a family, even if it's just on Twitter, who gets your work and can cheer you on. So that goes back to being a part of the community. You might not get the accolades at work because they don't understand how hard it was to make that chart, but the data fam does, and they're there for you.
And that advice, just a lot of these pieces, I mean, they really go to just, make sure you've got the moral support, make sure you've got the community, because you're not going to find everything you need from work. You're just not. Right. I do a lot of mentorship outside of my role, in part because there really is that just dearth of resources within companies.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We are running close to our hour, so I want to very briefly kind of jump into how to work with a recruiter. Number one, just remember we are working for both parties. So we're really trying to understand you as best as possible and the company itself. And so we're really trying to kind of work as, that matchmaker to make sure that we're hitting on your value set. So, definitely don't be afraid to, let us know what you're looking for. We're here to help you. We often, make introductions. We'll keep you in mind for future roles. So even if you don't get the role that you're after for this time, we're not looking at this as a very transactional relationship. We are looking to keep you in mind for future roles. Jeff, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think we're good there. I will just say that we're, one thing that is, and we've said it a couple times on here, is fit matters. And I think it's really hard to sometimes find what the true culture is at a company and organization. And one thing that working with a recruiter can help with, if they have a prior relationship with that company, they may be more in tune with the culture, what they're really like, what the organization is really like. And so that's another advantage of if you don't have connections inside the company, working with a recruiter, and if they know that that's a big deal for you, you should be able to trust them enough to kind of get really candid about what that means and what kind of culture you're looking for, what kind of fit. And if you don't have the right fit, it's okay. Find something else. You can't force fit, unfortunately. So
100% true.
I'm going to jump to a couple of the questions. So I'm going to highlight this one from Zifa. And so Mariana Costa, or hang on, not that one. There are community initiatives. At some point, I will learn to click in this platform.
Zifa, thank you for all your amazing comments. By the way, I was just reading.
Yes, I do need to call her out. She has been a wonderful, wonderful ambassador. I'm going to highlight this one, though. And it's about the functionality of Tableau resumes. I've seen a ton of them. I also have one, but I've never actually submitted one to a role. Do you think they can substitute for a traditional resume? Again, there's that definite, it depends, it varies. But I would say that, there are times I've had people send me their Tableau resume, and it's been far better than the quote unquote traditional resume. And so that's one I would say that, definitely don't hesitate to have that resume, out there and available where people can see it. I've also, when looking through profiles, seen resumes and kind of earmarked it and said, okay, this one I want to keep in mind. So keep in mind, that's also another avenue in.
Yeah, I would also just realize that your resume may be part of a stack of PDFs. So maybe even screenshot, maybe a visual resume where you include it, because you just never know how the person on the other side that's doing the interviewing, you want to capture their attention for first and foremost. But if they have to, even clicking a link and going out and seeing something else, it sounds crazy, but sometimes that takes too much
True.
time, right? And so I would say it's not one or the other. I think it's and.
Yes.
So
Yes. Like that's the reason I did my visual resume in Illustrator and made it a PDF. The exact reason you just said, Jeff.
And I want to highlight this next comment. So Mariana asked us, what content do you recommend for those who already develop reports but want to improve their data viz levels in Tableau? Again, I'm going to go back to that Tableau public piece. Nicole, do you want to maybe weigh in on some of the initiatives and how they break out for, somebody thinking of, okay, I'm just starting.
Sure.
What are some good places to start?
So I have two very specific recommendations to start with. And if you go on Twitter, I'll tell you the hashtags to look for. There's Back to Viz Basics. It's a community initiative that's been around about a year. The hashtag is B2VB, like Back to Viz Basics, but with the number 2 instead of the word. You can also Google Back to Viz Basics, and it's like the second search result. And then Zifa has put the link in, and it is in there. The other one is, if you're just starting with Tableau, Back to Viz Basics and Makeover Monday. Makeover Monday has been around for a long time, took a little hiatus, but it's wonderful. The data sets are good. You're making over a real visualization that came from somewhere real, like the internet, a publication, whatever. Eva Murray gives feedback on the vizzes every week via YouTube, and she will answer your questions in the chat if she can get to them in the time. And gives amazing feedback. So those are the two places I would start. If you want to join Women in Data Viz, we have a whole resource web page that's a work in progress, but has a bunch of stuff on it. But yeah.
Excellent. Well, without further ado, thank you all. I'm going to start closing out with, we've got more events.
I want to answer one question real quick.
Oh, yeah, this one is good.
Yeah, because we got this at the very beginning, and we can do a whole webinar on this. But because I made the comment as part of your interview process,
and it's not a stupid question. BC does.
Yeah, not a stupid question at all. Honestly, it's one of the first questions that, as I interviewed before, places before in past lives, it's one of my first questions that I asked, because it orients every organization. Their analytics maturity is all over the place. And what this question will, when you ask it, it will actually start to kind of slot in where they're at, right? Because not every organization has a chief data officer, right? That's kind of a newish role. But what it will do is it talks about, and usually a analytics strategy will have governance, information, data content, quality, data access, management, analytics, all these different kind of elements. But what it will do is it will orient you of how mature is this organization? Am I going into an organization and they're climbing up, they're maturing, or they're maybe on the lower end of that kind of maturity? For me, if I'm asking the question, I want to know, is there dedicated executive support? And so if you ask that question, if they do have a strategy, I ask them if I can actually see it. And then I get into a budget question. Do they have dedicated budget? Do they, what do the teams look like? Because then that starts to tell me, how am I going to slot into that organization? And if they have a strategy, that means the executives at a high level, they embrace analytics. And that's really, really important. Yeah. If they don't, that means that, okay, part of your role and part of your team's role is to make analytics important inside the organization, which is incredibly rewarding to do. But sometimes that's going to take a little bit of more effort. And if you're somebody that doesn't like to do that, you may get rejected a few times. You may be told, no, hey, this isn't, And so it's, it starts to kind of frame up not just your role, but your role as part of a group of people of saying, okay, we've got to make it important. We've got to show efficiency and, business value. And then Nicole talked about soft roles. The other thing that's part of that, if they say they don't have an analytics strategy, you're going to have to be developed soft roles of selling what the company's doing, what you're doing, what your team members are doing as well. And so being able to sell and tell a story and craft, those actually start to turn into more important things for you to do.
And expect a lot of pushback at some organizations. You would be surprised. Like, you're trying to help them make decisions based on data, which to me is obvious. That's why I need to work for an organization with a data strategy.
Yeah.
But my previous organization, so much pushback.
Yeah, I've been told in the last 22 years, no, that's impossible.
Yep.
A million times.
Yep.
And so
you don't have the budget for that. We're doing this instead later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I'll also chime in that the analytics strategy will also be partly covered in our Pillars of Success webinar. So that would be another great one to join. The other following event that we've got is Ecoline. So if you're dealing with spatial data, drive time analysis, please come check out our 11th, or it should be the 9th, to work on my dates. It is correct on LinkedIn. And then one thing I also want to offer everybody here as kind of a thank you is that if you're looking for work or even considering just, in the future, please feel free to set up some time with me. I've got time on my Calendly. That's a very hard word to say, by the way, but you can go out to that link, bcogly, /resume-review, and book 15 minutes with me. The sooner you send me your resume with that event, I can just quickly go through. I've got a questionnaire for a LinkedIn profile, and I can just give you some kind of pointers and recommendations, keeping some of the points in this webinar in mind.
Do it. Take her up on that. She has lots of good ideas, things I never think of. Bridget will say, I'm like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? Take her up on it. Do it.
So thank you, everybody. And then again, please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn or connect with us directly. Always happy to chat analytics. And thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.